There once was a stock that put to sea. The name of the stock was GME. The price blew up and the shorts dipped down. Hold my bully boys, hold. Soon may the tendy man come to send a rocket into the sun. One day when the trading is done, we'll take our gains and go. She had not been 2 weeks from shore when Ryan Cohen...
Again. We're live again. Anyway, I'm sorry that happened yesterday, man. You can't plan for outages or anything, but I thought we were off to a great start in our conversation. That was awesome. Mm. Mm. Sure. Sure. Ah, that's okay. No, that's all right. I mean, I figured, when you cut out, I was like, something catastrophic must have happened over there for an to bail like that, because it's like, oh, that rarely, we've been talking with each other for however long now. I've lost track, but at no point have I ever thought like, have you ever sort of just like left in the middle of a chat? I'm like, oh, that's weird. Anyway, it is to say it is to say that I'm glad we're back doing it again. So where were we? What were we talking about? I can't even remember. We don't necessarily have to pick up. Oh, let's do that. Let's do that, man, because that's a lot of fun. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm very, very proud about the premium feel. I think I've said this a handful of times in other conversations that I had with people, and that I don't really feel good. I don't know. It's not to say that it's a bad practice, a bad exercise from other creators, but I didn't realize, or I didn't feel right about putting these upgrades, quote unquote, behind sort of what are they called? They're not
Oh, stretch goals.
stretch goals, right? And I saw that and I was like, oh, that's interesting because as a mechanism, it ramps people up to be like, yo, we want to support that so we can get those things, right? But I think I thought in a space of like, how do I establish myself as a creator and a publisher in this space in which I feel like I was really severely behind when a bunch of creators were launching their projects. I thought, you know what, why don't I just give this upfront? And especially if I'm going to be charging this kind of a price tag, I want you to feel like you're getting your money's worth and doing hardcover, doing spot UV, doing all of the little bells and whistles that go into what would typically be behind stretch goals. I thought giving that to you up front, I hope people can see the value in that. And I hope that helps establish sort of a baseline of trust with me as a creator and as a publisher. So it was a no brainer after I looked at it from that perspective.
Oh yeah, I mean it's one way to go about it. And if
Yeah.
there's a way to set up expectation and trust with new backers, even though you're like a 30-year veteran within comics or
Yeah.
something, or art
Yeah.
at least, and like you've mentioned before, you're a newcomer into the crowdfunding space.
Exactly. I have to approach everything from that perspective. I can't just go in there and be like, with a cachet of 30 years plus as as a comic book professional, blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't want to deal with that because it's so hard to quantify any and all of it. Hey, you should trust me because I've been doing this for a while. That's stupid.
Yeah,
Like I would rather use that just as a nice sort of garnish to whatever effort that I put into self-publishing, but to lead with that, it's kind of stupid. So rather than saying, "Hey, I've been doing this for a while. You should trust me," there should be a built-in cachet of, trust, equity, blah blah blah. I'd rather say you don't know me from anybody, right? And I want to do as well as anybody else right out the gate. And what can I do, right? And if it happens to be that 30-year cachet counts for anything, then great. But to automatically assume there's success built into that, it's kind of dumb. And
yeah,
I've
just
seen
because.
other creators similar who have been in the industry for a while try that route. Hey, automatically assume that there's a built-in success and you see how miserably they fail, because they don't realize, hey, this takes a little bit more effort than just going out there and saying, I'm so and so, and I've worked on these projects, and I've worked on these books, and blah blah blah. Didn't you love those books? Shouldn't you love this thing that I'm, doing on my own? I'm like, no, there's rarely a correlation between that and success.
Yeah, and we've seen other comic book pros who have had crowdfunding projects for like damn near a decade now and they're yet to fulfill. So that's
That
not
is
you.
also
Yeah,
problematic.
you being X amount of years known or in the industry or whatever doesn't guarantee anything. And even if you
Mm-mm.
yourself have worked on Batman the Animated Series and Teen Titans and Ben 10, still
Mm-hmm.
that's still. And some people I understand that they trust you more at least on a creation quality level wise. But in regards to
Sure.
like delivering, that's a whole different
Yeah.
topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it right on the head. Like, you can list off all of my IMDb credits, but it does not qualify me to be a good publisher and good sort of fulfillment, right?
Right?
So, yeah, let's I wanted to do it right. I wanted to, again, if I got any sort of trust equity based on that pedigree, then I want to build on top of it as opposed to just assuming it's all going to work. So, anyway.
Yeah, and getting into the book now. I want to get out the
Yeah.
most very obvious and first glance thing is
Yeah.
the art itself, the line art, because some people count the color along with the line art as art. The line art
Mm.
itself is a masterclass of storytelling. I know
Oh, thanks, man.
some people can still get hung up on the way you draw like knees or thighs or style, but style is
Sure.
subjective. I'm talking about
Sure.
objective things such as composition and storytelling.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
underwater scene where we first meet Ark Poseidon with the submarine leaning downwards and leading your eye into the other panels, that is chef's kiss. That is so simple yet so effective.
Yeah, and I thank you very much. People pick up on those kinds of things, and here's the thing: like, having done storyboards for a bunch of the shows that you were talking about, some of that almost comes off as second nature, and it's not to be flippant about like I didn't even think about that, but to be perfectly honest, I didn't even think about it.
I mean,
It's almost like this. It's part of your toolkit. It's almost like asking a I know somebody like using a chef's kiss example. Like if you were asked a chef who knows what they're doing, who've been doing it for a while, well celebrated, well regarded, and then you ask them like, how come you're not using a what do you call it anymore, like a measuring spoon, And you go
yeah.
like, I don't. I've been kind of doing it for a while. I kind of know what a teaspoon, like relatively, generally looks like. So I don't really pay attention to like whenever I'm watching those kinds of shows, right? And they're just like, oh yeah, you put 2 teaspoons of whatever it is, and they're literally taking it out of the bottle and just pouring it in. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like shouldn't you be using a literal measuring spoon? And you're like, no, they've been doing it for a while. They kind of know what 2 teaspoons look like. Similar to that, I'm like, oh, the downward angle of a submarine, because it leads your eye to the next panel and so on and so forth. I'm kind of like, oh right, no, that's very it's awesome that you picked up on that, right? I'm doing it in such a way that's like that was almost intuitive, right? But not, clearly there's clearly a purpose to it. But in as far as like, okay, now I'm going to tilt this submarine so that it aims to the next panel. There wasn't that sort of level of deliberateness. It was just like, oh, that's me just pouring a teaspoon's worth of whatever because I kind of know what that looks like already.
Yeah, and it's like you mentioned, it's like a chef who just uses feeling like Uncle Roger would say. He just throws shit in the pan and it works.
Yeah,
He doesn't
yeah, no,
necessarily stop to measure and to think about it. It's like, oh, I just use A, B, and C and like this order or in different order, and it just works.
yeah, yeah, and it's not to take away from the actual sort of understanding of why it works, and I think that's why I'm careful to be just like, oh, I don't care, because clearly I do care, right? Um, but it comes from a place of years and years of study and application and failure and reapplication and trying it again and going through the exercise over and over until it becomes almost automatic. But I think what's missing from a lot of the things that I see out there in regards to storytelling is when people look at stuff, they just go like, "Oh, I did this because so and so did it, and it looked really, really cool," as opposed to like, "I'm doing this because so and so did it, and here's the reasons why I think they did it." You know,
Yeah,
I think that's
it's
very, very important. Even if it's inaccurate, even if it's like, oh, that's not really why. It's the sort of the analysis and taking a moment and being mindful of like, oh, those decisions are automatic, but at some point they're very deliberate. You know?
yeah, it's the difference between using purple as your shadow color because
Yeah.
everyone's doing it, or that's what's
Sure.
mandated by by the chief creative officer or whatever, and you're using
For
purple
sure.
because you know that certain lights tint the skin that way, or the combination of a certain light and the blood and the underneath the skin makes it look purple, and
Yeah.
yada yada. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I've seen that a lot as a rendering technique because as a palette, it's very, it's pleasing to the eye. You know, you put
yeah,
some level of saturation of purple as a shadow color, and you're like, oh, it's a lot less harsh than just going to a darker color of like whatever local color, which is whether it be clothes, whether it be skin, whether it be whatever. Like, oh, purple is a very sort of complementary color to a lot of different things, but some people are just doing it because they saw other people do it, not because they know why they're doing
yeah,
it. You know, they don't even go to that level of that surface level of like, oh, it's really very pleasing. They just go like, oh, purple because everybody's using purple now. You know, so
yeah.
now people have a tendency to overuse it, not realizing the mechanics behind it.
Or how in some articles and sectors it could be called bisexual lighting, which is all
Yeah,
purple and
that's. I mean,
magenta.
yes, that's almost like a meme, right? That's almost like an eye rolling sort of like I understand why they need to why there's an effort to label it, but I think it's more often than not the reason why you see a lot of like there's like a disgusting level of use of it is because it's currently what's popular, right? It's
Yeah, it's
currently
just
how
another
books are
trend.
being yeah, it's just another trend, and it's like, and it comes from a place of low effort. There's some
Yeah.
people who knew how to do it well. There's some people who knew the reasons why you're doing it, and then you get to that second, third, fourth layer of adopters that are just doing it because they saw somebody else do it, and that's why I think that's why it's borderline criminal, where you're like, oh, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and
It's laughable.
speaking of the
Yeah.
colors, Giuliano, man, the colors on this thing are. I haven't seen such saturated colors since I started learning how to color comics, and I was
Yeah.
just sliding around the color wheel like an idiot.
Yeah, no, I mean, to his credit, I remember, and I'll tell this story one more time. In that, when I saw Giuliano's colors on a book called Sovereign Wolf, Eric Weathers, the letterer for the book, actually introduced me to that pinup, and I asked, "Well, who did that?" And just the miscommunication. Weathers said, "Like, oh, you mean who did the art?" And I said, "No, who did the color?" And he's like, I don't know, and I found out, and Giuliano was, I don't think he had ever done conceptually as much work as I'm putting in front of him now. I
Poor
think
guy.
we took a page tally. The first time that he and I talked, I said, "Well, how much of this stuff have you done professionally?" And we took a page tally of how much work he had done. I'm like, "Well, I'm going to basically 3x, 4x that, especially if we go through this." And the look on his face was, I think, both dread and excitement at the same
I
time,
know, right?
because it was a
I've been
lot,
there.
but also he was up to the challenge. So to his credit, he was like, "Let's do this," and it was a little bit of feeling out, and I don't know where it came from. And I think it's just out of either professionalism, courtesy, and respect, where he was very careful about the stuff that he was coloring for the X amount of pages after the samples that he had turned in, which wowed me. It was that key scene on the oil platform where Divana was jumping down, and I said, "Do these pages as a sample." Nailed it, loved it, and I said, "Okay, let's go." And the X amount of pages that he started turning in thereafter weren't to the either the level or expectation that I had based on the first five pages. And I think he was measuring, like, do I continue to do that level of saturation? And I'm like, yeah, because that's what we're going for. I colored those characters in a very specific palette so that you can have fun with it. And from there on down, he has been taking his foot. He's taken his foot off the gas, and there are times when primarily our conversations now doesn't revolve around like color choices because he kind of has that in his back pocket. It's more like, how do we ground these characters in the environments that you've set up. So oftentimes most of my notes is just like, selecting areas and going like, oh, it's a blue room, then this needs to be, these guys need to be in a little bit more blue, so on and so forth. Oh, there's a limited light source and it's coming from here, then let's darken this area, I think there's rare where I'm going like, oh, the pages look weird,
I see.
and it's what do you call it? It's comes from a place of like planning and strategy, right? So we spend 3-4 hours at the beginning of each book as he's picking my brain about like, what did you think for this area? And sometimes I'm kind of like dismissed, like I didn't think about that, right? So he runs into the buzz saw. So then when he does color those pages, I'm like, ooh, that doesn't work. And that's primarily on me, right? That's 100% on me because he asked me at the beginning, what did you think about these scenes? What color palette, right? So now I'm even more zoned in. 3 books in, we're talking about certain things. He works best when I give him a starting line. Not to say that he needs to stay within the boundaries of that, but certainly we talk about movies and some movies that he doesn't know. I go like, remember the color palette from X movie? He's like, no, but I'll go look it up, and then he'll go apply it, and we're closer to calling it done. But I think he works best in those strategy conversations when I give him a starting off point. He's amazing, absolutely
Yeah,
amazing.
it's like we talked in that very first bot stream where it's better to have a guesstimate than nothing at all information wise
Yeah,
when it comes to
yeah.
working on something.
Yeah, and sometimes when I do, I'm to be perfectly fair, we don't have the answer. I'll say I don't have the answer right away when we're talking in those strategy meetings, like or in those syncs. And what I love now is that he's gotten so comfortable in working with me that he'll go when I say, "Oh, I don't know what that looks like," or "I don't really have an idea for color palette wise for those characters." There's an opening scene in book 3 where he said, "Eric, please send me your color palette for these heroes in the opening of the book." And I'm like, Jules, I don't know. I don't have an idea. I'll take a pass, but ultimately, I'm going to trust your call. To his credit, he's stuck to it. But there are instances when I say I don't know, and he goes like, I think I have an understanding, or I have um, based on my personal preferences and understanding the direction, palette wise, color wise, that we need to go with this book, he brings something to the table. And I love that collaborative process where I don't just sit there and dictate to him. He's like, I have something to bring to the table as well. And it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see, and it turned out perfect. I might say perfect on the pages because they're just a
Yeah,
joy to look at, especially in the more atmospheric scenes where you can tell
sure,
that there has been a conversation where, hey, this has to be pushed back, this has to be pushed even further back into the background.
sure,
It has to be like
sure.
a blue or a red.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, most of our conversations revolve around how we talk about color first, naturally, because that's the job that needs to be done, but also how it's supposed to feel. So it's like, oh, it's a very somber conversation. We need to have it like this. Yeah, it's maybe 7 times, 8 times out of 10, it's going to be the color that it is because of the environment around them. But then there are times when we're like, we need to make this a bit more somber. So we ramp it down to like improbable, right? But feasible, right? Um, so that it helps stand up the narrative. And rare have I ever had that kind of conversation with past collaborations with artists and colorists.
Yeah, that's great to see. I think it was Andrew Dahlhaus who mentioned one of his. He's usually Brett Booth's colorist. He mentioned that if
Mm,
color doesn't help inform emotion, that it's
yeah.
worthless to have it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, everybody has their plan of attack when it comes to how you engage the right sort of emotion to your audience. Ours is not really all that deep, like we know what Arc Athena is. We know the kind of story that it's supposed to tell. It's big and apologetic and bombastic, and there's like, it harkens back
Yeah.
to the kind of comics that I used to read as a kid. So it's not really all that profound, but at the very least, it has intent. It's not just colored for the sake of being colored.
Yeah, yeah, it has intent and direction. It knows what it is, and the thing I
Mhm.
like the most about it is that it's unapologetic
Yeah.
in that knowledge. And
Yeah,
the
I mean,
last,
I had to say, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna talk about the lettering because I haven't been paying too much attention to mainstream comics, but emphasizing, you know, putting some words in like bold lettering to emphasize your point is something that I've missed, and it truly is a work of art. When you can,
Oh,
there's a
sure.
difference between I know what you did and I know what you did.
Right. Right. No, I mean it's weird how that is. I don't know. People pick up on it when they see it, right? If they're keenly attuned to it, they pick up on it. Sometimes it just like zips by them. But I think it's a pretty amazing tool in the toolkit
Yeah.
if you're using it if you're using it well. You know, especially to emphasize dialogue, especially to emphasize like intent. So yeah, when used well, when done well, it's super effective. When done poorly, it's just like a distraction, and that's the last thing
Oh
you
yeah.
want to do.
Yeah, because here's the sad part about being a great leader like Eric Weathers. If you do your
Mm.
job well, you will be damn well invisible. But if you do your job poorly, you'll stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, sure. And it's rare that I've ever had conversations with Weathers that I'm like, I think you did that wrong. You know, it's less about that because he sends over drafts. And it's me and Joe Fulton just moving bubbles around so that we're sure that it reads as intended. It's more utility, right? Than
Yeah.
oh man, that was done poorly right off the bat. So that's the great thing about having a dependable a dependable craftsman in the pipeline is because number one, they have an intimate understanding of how an intimate and professional understanding of how things are supposed to work, and because he himself is an artist, he knows like, oh, intuitively this is where it should go, right?
Yeah.
So both of those things in tandem work out great to the benefit of this book. So thanks to him for being as professional and as invisible as he has been.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, having that communication up and down the pipeline and an editor that actually edits just brings in that extra X factor to make sure that everything, if it doesn't come out perfect, it at least runs smoothly.
Yes, yes, and that's ultimately what you can aim for. I have a term that says like let's shoot for the stars, and if we end up on the moon, that ain't too bad.
I know,
Not many people
right?
get not many people get to the moon, right? But when you have people who are dialed in to making sure not just that they do their job well, but they have an understanding of the quote unquote mission. You see those memes all the time, right? Where they're like they knew the mission, right? And I think to
Oh
each
yeah.
person on the or they knew the objective to each person on the pre-production pipeline, even the post-production pipeline. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, so moving into the actual book now, the review of the
I
book
get
with the
it.
creator himself. I do have
Yeah.
one actual gripe that is just borderline unreasonable. That is that the book doesn't start out with a splash page. the
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is the most unreasonable thing that I could think of in regards like if I could nitpick to the nth degree about this book, what could it be? And it's yeah,
Yeah.
it's that is that old Marvel style of start off your book with a splash page.
Yeah.
Which I
I'm
can
trying to
understand that
think.
it's difficult to do. It is sometimes
I'm trying to
the
think.
narration
Yeah.
just
Well,
doesn't
I
work.
I don't disagree with you, right? I think that let me think if that was the original intent because in I think by page 3 or by page 3 you get the helicopter shot, right?
It's page two even.
There you go. So technically, that was the first page.
Oh,
Was that
I see.
helicopter shot, right? That big splash. And but because we needed to, in going back with Joe and really going through it with a finer tooth comb as far as narrative and storytelling was concerned, we ended up adding pages to the book, because we needed to have a setup.
Yeah, yeah.
Effectively, we sacrificed sort of the splash page opening so that as an audience you have a clear understanding of like what's happening, an understanding of arc, an understanding of like what you are supposed to expect with the issue, sort of just like tonally where it was supposed to go in regards to the audience, right, and how big that was, and sort of the new media that was involved. So that was critical, and adding that extra page really helped solidify that. So I guess to your point, in my defense, it kind of started off with a splash, but not necessarily ended up with it. That didn't end up in the finished product.
Yeah, at the end of the day, what matters the most to the story, what services the story best, and that
Yeah.
first page with those like five or so panels worked perfectly to set up the whole. What is our Athena? Oh, they're just a bunch of TikTok superheroes, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's I think that's if you read that and then you start leaning into the book for the remainder of the issue, you kind of get it, right? And it's for me, I don't know why I don't know why this is, but I wanted to do so much more explaining at the front end. And then after my conversation with Joe, he's like, Eric, you don't need much. The audience, trust your audience, trust that they know what you're getting at without having to like really like burden them with so much narrative and so much explaining and so much, just extra, right? You don't need that
Yeah.
much. And that first page did a lot of that. And we were like, oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And then people got it, right?
Yeah, as someone who tends to read sometimes books that have like a lot of lore dumps or they require explanation of the power system. That first
Sure.
page was more than enough. It's like, oh, these are a bunch of like trained superheroes by a media company, and by the end of the book, when you read that literal YouTube apology video that Divana does, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I know exactly what this is.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I mean that's great. I mean everything to service the story. Great part about Joe is just he knows the sort of the proper amount of what that means. So anytime I remember him saying to me, Erica, yeah, I'm going to edit this. There's going to be times when I think it just could need a little bit of, nudging, and you don't have to draw any art. You don't have to draw any new art. We can just do it via dialogue or via caption. I'll find a way to make that work. I'm like, Joe, that's great, but if I need to do new art, then I need to do new
Yeah.
art, right? Everything is in service of the story, so don't be afraid. Hey, we missed it, and here's because he kind of came in after the process. I was already about four, maybe as many as 5 issues deep of the 6 issue miniseries, and he started getting the script. And his fear was just like, gosh, I don't want to get in the way of the momentum that you have. And if we've got to go back and redraw pages, I think that's in his heart, in his head, he was like, I don't want to do that to you. And I was like, screw that. I'm not going to put this much time, effort, and energy if it's not working. So
Yeah.
thankfully, he's taking that to heart. And there's times when it's like, dude, there's not enough room to do. I know for sure. We had this conversation just 2 months ago. No, actually, before the new year. He was taking a look at this double page splash, and he's like, Eric, I just read the script. There's nowhere to put these bubbles without covering the art, right? And I was like, yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. And he's like, do you want to trim the dialogue? And I can tell by the tone in his voice, he was like, that's suboptimal.
Yeah.
And so I was
Yeah.
like, no, I'll just shrink the art and draw everything around it. And he's like, holy crap! And so I turned it around in a day.
Magic of
And so
digital, baby.
yeah, absolutely. And so he was, that was a really great sort of, that to me it was one of the standouts of our collaborative process, which is he goes, we need to draw more, and I'm like, I'm happy to draw more.
Yeah, the beauty of the independent crowdfunding or just the independent scene in general is that we don't have to be beholden to the monthly pipeline of mainstream comics
Mm.
because in this same scenario that you guys had in this monthly day in day out pipeline, it would have been sacrificed. Like you wouldn't have been able to go back and redraw pages, or you would have just sent in whatever you drew and whatever botched dialogue, and that would have been it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the liberating things about this whole experience is that number one, it's my book, right? It has a lot of different people helping to either push or pull this giant effort of getting this book out the door, but it feels like it feels it in earnest something that is an extension of me, and by proxy because of their participation, the rest of the team, right? So I have a certain level of pride in making sure this thing is as polished as I can possibly make it, and that's why I engaged a bunch of professionals to help me out, and it's been stellar, right? The outcome has been stellar, but also just the nature of crowdfunding and self-publishing, it allows you to be a little bit more agile in your decision
Oh yeah.
making. There are times when we're like, oh, that doesn't work, and we've got to bump or we've got to like move that page around. Here's a perfect example in that issue that you're holding right now, right? Leo, who was the designer and what do you call it? Everything else for the book, the magic invisible man behind the scenes. He's effectively Oz. And he was laying out the book. He was formatting the book, getting ready to send it to the printer, and he's like, Eric, there's a page, or the pages are misnumbered in such a way that this double page spread can't work. I'm like, get out of here,
Oh
like,
no.
and he's like, no, I'm serious. So he sent me the layout, and he's like, here we go. And, typically double page spreads, nature of the spread of the book is even odd, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, how the heck did that happen? And he's like, I don't know, man. You're drawing and writing it, so it's on you to figure it out. And I'd come to realize it was because I wanted to include this one page right before. I think where it would have landed was right before the introduction of Art Poseidon in that giant bubble, that Golden Iris had made around them,
Hmm.
and there was a little bit more explainy page there, right?
I see.
Of Jan talking, behind the scenes in an almost like scrambled signal, talking to the submarine, talking to members of Ark Poseidon before they got deployed. I added that page and just without mindfulness, that's what screwed things up. But because it was an addition page, when we plucked it out, the plot still worked, right? And
Nice.
that's a, what do you call it? That's a you know f up on me for trying to be a little bit too explainy when it wasn't really necessary. Because I don't know, it's not, at any point when people were reviewing the book, they're like, "Oh, we don't know what the heck is going on." It's to Joe's point, which is like, trust your audience. They're good.
Yeah.
They'll figure it
We're
out.
smart enough.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Yeah, and I had that happen to me once as well, and I had to go back in and draw an extra page. And now, whenever I lay out my books, it's like page X, and I write a little R or L on top to know that it's
Yeah.
left side or right side.
Oh, exactly, exactly. I'm not that smart, so even with book 6, as I'm laying it out, that's the reason why you see me looking down, because I'm drawing it out as we talk. Is that I had to go back and um, add pages to 6 because I wanted to make sure that certain moments were earned, not even just narratively, but just like visually, And I don't want to go
I
into
see.
spoilers, so I'll be as general and vague about it, like just like that. But like, there's certain scenes where I was like, oh, I need to really give the audience what I think is going to be the expectation for this really key scene. Again, visually, not necessarily, not immediately narratively. And then after I added those pages, my paranoia kicked in. I was like, "Oh crap, did I just screw up?" So I went
Is
back,
there
and
not a
now I'm in
misplaced DPS?
exactly. Now I'm writing. I'm writing in red letters. Using red markers or whatever it is in the upper corner of the page. Like, this is page 32. This is page 33. Just so I'm tracking it. At least I'm tracking it visually.
Yeah. So back to the story. My
Yeah.
first impression of the Arc Athena team that they're just a bunch of spoiled celebs. And while Killer Performance is still my favorite character, especially visually,
Yeah. Yeah.
that bitch needs some straightening out. like her and Gogo Gosmore, who is like an absolute JoJo's character, are the most
Sure.
annoying two people on that team. And I'm pretty sure
Sure.
that's deliberate.
Yeah, well, what's strange is that I'm an old, you know, piece of wood when it comes to like what's happening out in the world right now. But I'd also come to realize that there are times when people act and conduct themselves the way they do because they just don't have the genuine experience to understand how things work. They just know how things work for them. And
I
I
see.
think, characters like Gogo, characters like, Killer Performance have a general understanding of how their world works as it revolves around them, but not necessarily how the world works as they revolve around it. So I think it's accurate for their characters in regards to that former definition of how it means to exist, and I
Yeah.
think it works. And to your point, it's
Oh
like, yeah,
yeah.
sure, it's these guys are numbskulls when it comes to the grander picture of things, especially when you contrast them to how Arc Poseidon, operate, right? But I think it's pretty in line to how people who have very low worldly experience how they would conduct themselves.
No, yeah, just this is sort of a I don't want to call it an epiphany because it should have been obvious like months before while reading Berserk, but your character can be a bad person but at the same time be a great character. Those
Sure.
two things aren't necessarily exclusionary of each other.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you can both of those things can coexist all at the same time. You can have a complete dum dum but a great character, and if you as a tool, you can use that to help highlight everything else in the theme of what of the story, the kind of story that you're trying to tell. Now, it's up to each author what they want to do with that character, if they want to have them stay constant, or if you use them to be like, here's how you refocus the story so that you're going like, oh, I understood the theme, but now that the story has moved along so much further, and you contrast it to that character's worldview or who they are, then you go like, oh, this is so much more relevant now,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of people who don't know how the world works, Divana,
Yeah.
well, why a poor leader? She is excellent at being at it. Like, she is the perfect case for someone like Jaco to just get in there and like set her straight.
Yeah.
Because
Well, the
my
thing is, it's like, I'm sorry, I cut you out. Go ahead, Bill.
yeah, because my impressions of Divana are like, oh, she just comes in, barks orders like some rabbit drill sergeant, and just slaps whoever decides to mouth off, even though they are within their line and within their right to do so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she's perfect. I think I think she's wonderful as a character. I think she's
Oh yeah.
wonderful as she's an appropriate leader for Arcathena, and they definitely picked the right person for that job. And I'm so enthusiastic. I'm so excited for the readers to see where we take her by the end of 6 issues. I'm looking at the colors as Giuliano are sending it to me right now for book 3, and I'm like, wow, this is so, especially by way of conduct, this is so awful. As far as where we take her, but also wholly appropriate,
Yeah.
and you contrast it with a lot of different things that's happening in the background. She's so much fun to write, So for me, that that is the reward, is to understand. Oh my gosh, this is so awful. This is such an awful thing that she's doing, all for the sake of staying in character. But man, oh man, is it fun to do?
Yeah, bad person, great character.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
she,
You're
among
the
the entire
perfect
Arc
example.
Athena team, she is like the prime candidate for character growth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, each character in Arc Athena, she's the culmination of all of those characters.
Oh yeah.
You have somebody like Undisputed Phoenix, who clearly understands her role in that team, but lacks sort of the confidence, right? So she's sort of she exemplifies the person who is like a little bit more meek, a little bit more sort of subdued, but it comes from like a place of like I said, lacking in confidence, right? And somehow that lacking in confidence exists probably in Divana as well, but she overcomes it and has built a mechanism of like assholicness.
Yeah.
Right? She's come up with something to cover all that lack of confidence up, whereas in Undisputed Phoenix, it's front and center.
Yeah, and while reading the book, the thing that really caught me, I don't want to say
Yeah,
bar surprise because that would stain the rest of American or Western comics coming out,
yeah, yeah.
is that every character talks with their own unique voice. Like, if I read dialogue without necessarily looking at the art, I can tell who is
Mm,
talking.
sure, sure. That took forever and a day
Oh
to
yeah, I can
understand,
imagine.
because because I wanted to have them be their own individuals. Yeah, sure. There's going to be, you know, there's going to be certain crossover. There's going to be certain like,
Yeah.
especially how people are these days. There's going to be a way that people talk, right?
Yeah, KP and
But
Gogol
in as far
Gossamer
as
again. They
yeah,
talk
yeah,
pretty
they're
similar.
similar. Yeah, they're pretty similar because they come from similar environments, right? In as far as social media is concerned, but in as far as how they conduct themselves, I wanted to have individuals. So you look across the entire team, not just, and that was really where the challenges came from, which is it wasn't just coming up with voices for Arcathena, but it was also coming up with voices for Arc Poseidon.
Oh
And Arc
yeah.
Poseidon was so much, it's such a weird contrast and similarity to Arcathena, because if you take a look at somebody like hypersexual, who talks in the same sort of avenues as Gogo and as KP, right? Like those three people could probably, by way of their social media speak, quote unquote, be very similar, if not almost identical, but it's in their conduct that makes them different, right? It's
Yeah.
like, hypersexual is like completely irreverent. She's like, I don't give a shit about any and all of this, you know. But when the professionalism side engages, you're like, oh, that's a killer
Oh,
cyborg,
she is a
So
murder machine.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's that's the key difference in all of them. It's not necessarily just in dialogue, not necessarily just in speech, but also in how that speech contrasts to conduct.
Yeah, and speaking of such speech patterns, the character that stood out the most is Gristle himself. Like what I
Yeah,
started reading that guy, like from the very first sentence when I saw
yeah.
his abbreviated speech, Wolverine's the 19's X-Men cartoon Wolverine voice popped in my head. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna read it like this now.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's. I mean, you're not the first person who's mentioned that, or at least something similar. And I think people make that sort of those analogs to be like, oh, it's Wolverine, is it? And I'm like, well, yeah. If that's what makes you ultimately comfortable, the character that I had told to Joe, whenever we have to refer to be like, does that sound right? Does that work right? Is Jeff Bridges in the recent incarnation of True Grit, right? I
Yeah,
always think of Gristle as Rooster Cogburn from that movie, and anytime that I'm writing him or anytime that I'm writing sort of the isms into his dialogue or in his speech, I'm like, all right, I got to refer back to that, and thankfully Joe is there to keep me honest. Like, that's a little bit too proper. Eric is probably going to sound like this, without encroaching or crossing the line into like cartoonish, Daffy
I
Duck,
see.
kind of versions of cowboy, right?
Yeah, and speaking of hypersexuals' irreverence towards anything and probably anyone, like her
Yeah,
self-intro speech was the most chaotic. Actually,
it's
no, the second most chaotic thing that I read through that book. It was the
yeah,
most unexpected thing, and I believe
yeah,
like she's like, I am hypersexual and I'm here to kick all kinds of ass.
yeah. It's funny because like the humor in the book isn't, which is really something I after writing the first draft, or maybe even as further down in the second, and that the humor in the book isn't over the top. It's a little bit understated, similar to the way I conduct myself as far as humor is concerned. It's like it's borderline deadpan, it's borderline inappropriate, it's weird, right? Or it's definitely weird. But in the case of this book, I needed to find little opportunities for a little bit of like levity, and there wasn't a way to naturally do it, right? Because again, thematically, tonally, the book isn't made to be inherently funny, and there are ways that humor is written in modern comics now where you're like, that's supposed to be funny, but it's
Oh yeah,
so out of context, it's so out of character, it's so out of like not in the moment of, and it doesn't help you understand the character at all, so it's just written because for the sake of being written in there because the
yeah.
author thought, oh, that'd be kind of funny and cute, and it's like, yeah, it is. It's You're not inaccurate, but it takes you completely out of the story. It takes you out of the moment. And I was, because I'm not that experienced as a writer, because I had my reservations of how being able to do it well. After I'd read it all the way through. I was like, oh, it needs levity, and I'm not. I'm there isn't enough for it, and so I found the vehicle for that, and it still speaks to her character in hypersexual, right? So on her entrance, the humor there is because X amount of panels previous or X amount of pages previous, you had Gristle introducing who she was in context to the team, right? What she
Yeah.
does and all her capabilities and so on. And then you're like, whoa, that's an insane killer cyborg lady, right? And that power set is perfectly complements what she needs to do. And so you have this expectation in your head of how she's going to be. And then when she finally talks, you're like, that's completely different than,
Yeah.
and it helps you understand character a little bit more because Gristle sets her up as one way, right? And then when she talks for herself in her own voice, you're like, oh, you're not just that. You're also this ridiculous person that doesn't care about the situation but can get the job done. That was
Yeah.
fun to
And
discover.
she cares so little about the situation. Like she made an alien ejaculate on her in bric-a-brac. Like I think I almost thought that I had like a major moment spoiled because a few weeks ago we were on Colo's stream and he mentioned that KP and her Galaxian might be in a romantic relationship. And then last week I read, and I didn't read. I was listening to Dan Fan's review of the book, and she
Mhm.
also mentioned there's a lot of ejaculation in the book. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna stop here. We're gonna wait for the book. And for a second, I thought that maybe Galaxian was the one who was ejaculating all over KP. But when I saw it in the book, that it was the giant alien ejaculating over hypersexual and bric-a-brac, I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I didn't get spoiled. And
It's
I'm in
still
for
in
this.
line, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's still it's not out of character for the book and the theme and the tone. You know what I mean? It was definitely like I remember when Bancroft got a preview copy of it and he was like, "Did you seriously just do that scene?" You know? And you're like, "Yeah, yeah." And it was one of those moments where you go, and I can't recall whose YouTube review show it was where they put like a marker on that area in that specific scene where he was like, this is so appropriate for this book, and but it's just like this holy crap moment. I can't believe they just did that scene. And I go like, yeah, if it was out of character I'd be concerned, if it was out of the context of theme, if it was out of context of like the things that I wanted to establish for the book, and I just did it for the sake of doing it because oh, it's so cool. Then I'd be kind
Yeah,
of
it
like,
would have been
it
off.
feels a little, yeah, it would feel gimmicky, right? But because it's in character and it's on brand, so to speak, for how the series is going to be, then I feel like that's the reason why it lands so well, you know?
Yeah, and it was drawn to near perfection. But the only thing that you could have pushed for is if you had hypersexual literally lick her fingers clean.
Oh, that's too much. I'm
But yeah,
crass, but not that level of crass.
yeah. Moving forward into the story is again we see Divana's lack of either confidence as a leader or experience, whatever she's hiding. She disobeyed a direct order and got her men, or part of her supporting crew, literally killed
Mm.
with her
Yeah,
own poor
and
calculation. And
yeah, it's a lot of, again, I believe that it fits her character. I believe that it fits sort of like the the insecurities that were outward in Undisputed Phoenix, but internal in Divana, right? And I think that's why I had Phoenix specifically the one reach out to her and tell her, "Hey, we need to go," right?
yeah,
Because it really is a characteristic a character flaw in both of them, but in what do you call its case? In Divana's case, it has sort of these really awful results, right? Because she doesn't want to be told that she's that she's just like an extension of a distraction, right? While Arc Poseidon are the ones that are actually doing the things that makes a difference, and you know I find a way to have her work through that. But unfortunately, this in the early, in the early part of the story of the book, that level of insecurity has this really, really awful result of getting a lot of people killed.
yeah. And one of the most common ways to hide insecurity is to overcompensate.
Mm.
And boy, did she
And I think that's what
overcompensate.
she did. She did. In the theatrical way of like how she wants to be taken seriously, she overcompensates to the point of like people getting hurt.
Yeah, and while I was reading the letter pages, I was like, wait, this apology and this whole speech sounds familiar. And like one dialogue balloon later, I'm like, oh, this is a fucking YouTube apology video. I know what this is. I've been here
Yeah,
before.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. It's people who know. Number one, I don't know. The interesting thing was when I reread that now in print, I was like, I wonder if I intended this for something. My intention was to have Divana do it, so she had the sort of wherewithal, enough awareness to be like, oh, this is what quote unquote a YouTube apology is supposed to sound like, right? But then a part of me was like, I wonder if people had read into this as if it's something that Arc prepared for her, which is also a viable concept,
Yeah,
But I never thought about it from that perspective.
yeah, and the last few pages where Gristle just walks up to her and taps her on the shoulder and goes like, "Hey," I was like, "Oh, he's just gonna read her the right like here. He's gonna go." He's gonna correct her on her speech that's about sacrifice and not support. But him literally going for a right cross on her was unexpected, something I'm damn well sure I wouldn't see anywhere else, especially in the mainstream space. But oh, is it so well deserved?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's like after you write it, after I draw it, after you write it and after you draw it, I take a step back and I said, like, is this a tiny bit too severe? You know? And I had spoken about, without going into too much detail in regards to the remainder of the plot and remainder of the story, and we're going to take the series. I'd spoken about it to my wife, and she read through issue 1, right? And I said, "Do you think that was a tiny bit over the top at the end?" And her attitude was like, "No, not because of, some weird preconceived notion. I know people will get into like toxic masculinity and blah blah blah. Some people
Yeah.
can leverage those scenes into that space, um, but it goes in line. And this is what this is what she told me. She's like, this goes in line to accountability, right? If
Yeah.
you are going to lead a team of people, gender aside, you need to be accountable for the actions that you've done. Now, should it have gone to that level of extreme? It's kind of apropos that we just saw, Will Smith smack the hell out of Chris Rock at that award
Yeah.
ceremony, which made me laugh. But to me, it just speaks to, like, if you're gonna act like a fool, don't expect to not have any sort of, you should expect some level of repercussion outside of the public facing version of whatever it is that you're doing, right? Conduct yourself as a professional, right? But in this case, she should expect some level of repercussion in private, right? So publicly, it can be whatever the heck it needs to be, but privately, and
No,
that's
yeah.
the reason why I would think, again, using the Academy Awards as a point of reference, Gristle didn't go and smash her face in, while she was on camera.
Yeah.
But it's accountability. It's about leadership. It's about accountability. It's about like I just said, like leadership, and obviously what it meant to be at the front end of something, losing track of what you're responsible for, and being accountable to what happens thereafter. I thought that was appropriate.
Yeah, it looks perfect to me. I was
Yeah.
expecting maybe a slap, maybe a Will Smith electric boogaloo, but no, like a straight up punch. I was like, I didn't expect this, but it works so much better.
And also, it's because if you know out of respect, I believe, right? And again, this is a different perspective than somebody else might have, right? You are treated similarly as anybody else because you are respected, not because you are coddled. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Anybody else would get smashed across their face, and so you must be as well, right?
yeah.
And so that
Replace
that level
Divana
of
with
consistency,
Gossamer or whoever it was leading the team at the time. If you fuck up to that degree, a punch is coming for you regardless.
absolutely. Now it does speak a lot about Gristle's character that he would go to that level, right, of physicality. But okay, I'm not going to make excuses for why Gristle conducts himself the way he does.
Yeah, I
Different
mean,
people react different ways.
the guy literally takes a hit so he can return a more devastating hit, so it works
Yeah,
with him.
exactly. It's all in character, and I think that's a really great place to be.
Yeah, like after I finish reading the book, like I now know that Gristle is the kind of guy who will praise you when praise is merited, but when you fuck up, he will also be there to put you in your place.
Oh, sure. And if far be it for me to say that, oh, he's such an awesome character. I think just that conduct alone clearly states how imperfect he is.
Yeah,
Right?
you
There's
you can call
probably
him a bit
better
of an
ways.
asshole.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. I'm not denying the fact that he's a jerk. Um, so it's the idea that teams exist in perfect harmony and lacking in flaws that doesn't give me much place to go as a writer and as an artist and as a creator. I want imperfect people,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Because it
because
gives an opportunity for you to contrast. Like, it's so strange that people, there's a couple of times when people are like, no, forget Arc Athena, show me more of Arc Poseidon. I'm like, you mean that set of imperfect people?
Yeah.
Like that that set of like screw ups and like, just, nobody in point is, nobody in the series is infallible. Nobody in the series is just like the amazing shining light, the beacon of like perfection. None of them are that, but that's what makes them interesting to me.
Yeah, that's what makes it all fun. Like when you see a character that has flaws and you're rooting for them to be better, to become a better person, that's what keeps
Right.
people interested in a story and makes a story worth existing. Because if everyone's
I agree.
perfect, then where's the conflict? Where's the growth? Where's
Yeah,
the
no,
story?
I don't like I don't like the idea of just like a team populated by like super amazing people. Maybe in their power sets, maybe in the costumes, maybe in how they like the cool moves that they do or whatever it is. But in as far as like being people, I think, giving them flaws, some major, some very major, and some minor. Though that's what makes it interesting, at least for me.
Oh yeah, for me as well. Because like I mentioned before, if your character has it all from the get go, what are you gonna change in the story? Because it's been done before. Where
Yeah.
let's say One Punch Man, he is physically overpowered. Like the title says, he punches everyone. He defeats every opponent with like one punch. His growth
Right.
is on an emotional level. But when you
Right.
finish that, or if you don't have that, you gotta grow the world around him. But then again, the
Yeah.
story
Sure.
doesn't become about him. It becomes more of a story about the things around him, and then
Yeah.
you lose your main
I agree.
character.
Yeah, no, I'm not talented, experienced, or whatever else enough to pull off that kind of story. So I make it, at least to me, I make it very, very simple. And yet, I've shown you behind the scenes some of the pages that are upcoming, and rare do like if you just take it at face value with an oncoming alien invasion, people are like, "Whoa, this is really big," and I'm like, "Yeah, the what do you call it? The show, right? The stage is very big and bombastic, and again, like visually unapologetic, but the story is pretty simple.
Yeah, and
It's really, really simple.
I think that is probably the most effective way to tell a story like this. Because let's say the best superhero book that's been out for like quite a few years, My Hero Academia, its story, its
Mm,
characters and whatnot
mm.
are very simple. They're not
Yeah,
rewriting, whatever. They're not rewriting Watchmen or Alan
right,
Moore's Swamp Thing. It's super simple,
right.
but like you've mentioned, like you've done in your own book, it's done in such a visually bombastic and unapologetic way that it just takes you for the ride. You enjoy it, and you don't sit down to think, "Oh, this is a simple story. I can't enjoy a hero digging down deep to defeat evil." What do you mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. You have to hook them some way, right? And I think visually, because it's a comic, that's one of the easiest things to do is to give them something pretty to look at. But if you really get down to the nitty gritty of it, it's a story about these two people. It's going to be, and people are like, hey, have one of the. It's interesting for you to say that. Oh, I'm really into killer performance. There's a bunch of people out there who are like, dude, I cannot wait to see what you do with oh gosh
Old man strength.
with Old Man Strength. Like people are
Yeah,
like,
because
I want to see more of that guy.
his
I'm all
power
like,
set
yeah,
does raise a lot of fan speculation, a lot of fan
yeah,
theories.
yeah. No, that's fun. Obviously, I want that because that's the kind of feeling, the emotional space that I was in when I would read like old school X-Men stuff and old school Thor stuff. But the part this first part of this leg of the story primarily revolve around um, Divana and Gristle, right? And the team complements the themes of the first story arc. You're going to get insight and background on all of the main characters, but what do you call it? Truth be told, it's going to be primarily about Gristle and Gristle and Divana.
Yeah, I much rather have it like that. We will have some background, like I said, background information on everyone else, but the main story will revolve around two people because it's easier to execute. Because I've seen stories
Well,
where
yeah,
people have a giant cast and they try to develop everybody at the same time, and it becomes a jumbled mess that you can't follow.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that speaks a lot about me, right? Like, I'm not that. I'm not ashamed to say I'm not that experienced as a writer. So rather than think of everything as like a giant soap opera where I have to do coverage on everyone, I'd rather say, hey, here's everybody. Here's their attitudes in regards to the theme and the story that's happening so far. But primarily, I'm going to spend a lot of time and energy and focus on these two people because I believe they create such a great contrast with each other. And naturally, just overall, sort of like not combativeness, but definitely sort of like there's two opposing views, right? They're not necessarily contradiction, but here's how this one leader sees leadership and accountability. Here's the other way that leadership is this is how this leader focuses on that, right? And their accountability. So it's interesting. At least for me, it's what I can wrap my mind around.
Yeah, and so far it's working, and I think you're selling yourself a bit too short on the inexperience and talent, not talented enough as a writer. Because when I look at my own reading for the past 2 years now,
Mm,
90% of those stories are just simple stories done well. I think a lot of
sure.
people try to flex their writing skills, or I hate the word
Mm,
talent, but throw that in and be like, oh, I'm going to
mm-hmm.
create this massive 100 issue story arc, and Batman gets left at the altar, and yada yada yada, and it ends up all falling apart. While if you take a
Right.
simple story but you execute it, according to plan and perfectly, it's just so much more entertaining and it's more memorable,
Yeah.
which is the hidden factor of such stories.
Well, keep in mind, I don't have the same challenges as like the guys who have been writing or who are currently writing books that have been around since forever, right? Their challenges are going to be something along the lines of, well, what hasn't an audience seen before? How do we keep this thing relevant, fresh, and new-ish to people how do we make it a jumping on point for whatever potential audience that we're looking towards getting? Yeah, like all of those challenges are not in my to-do list. My to-do list is just tell the most compelling story that I'm capable of telling and not have, decades upon decades of baggage, quote unquote baggage associated with these characters. So I'm unencumbered in that sense, but also I would think that we have similar missions, similar objectives, which is to say, just tell a really easily understandable story and make compelling characters. And sometimes it just has to be that basic. And I
Yeah.
know a handful of books that I've read. I don't perplexingly sidestep that. I'm like, oh, that's complex for the sake of being complex. I don't understand
Yeah.
that.
It's fluff for the sake of fluff, which is just empty
Yeah.
calories. And while sometimes it can work, very often it looks like the writer just masturbating themselves to their own craft.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in those cases, it's enough for me to check out. But if I were to really start thinking about, it, I'm like, how did the editor let this get out the door?
No, right?
Anyway.
It is weird that we have forgotten how to tell simple stories, which is more than enough nowadays. Because it's been bleak enough for the past like what 3 years now that people just need
Mm.
escapism. And if you can sit
Yeah,
down and just watch ATHENA do their flashy thing and Poseidon do their Black Ops thing, then that's a win for everybody.
yeah. I often think like, are people reacting this positively to Arc Athena because I'm doing a decent job storytelling, or is it just so much blight that they've gotten used to that the one time they are witness to or have supported a book that comes anywhere near sort of like quote unquote expectation, that it's such a relief to them that it's getting favorable reaction. You know what I mean? It is to
Yeah,
say
I
that it could be
understand.
both, right? But it's pretty fun to think of that kind of stuff.
I mean, the Doc himself was probably the most staunch critic in comics, especially with his history and knowledge of X-Men. Had to read it multiple times, and he had to rewrite his own brain to be like, oh, wait a minute, this is an actual hyper compressed story, not whatever
Yeah.
bullshit I'm being served nowadays. I need to actually set up for this.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, my nervousness often comes from, people knowing the kind of era that I grew up in, and therefore inherently sort of just like, emulate with this effort, right? And so when I put it in front of people who also have those similar tastes, my fear is just like this makes no sense, or like, oh, this was nice, but it's a nice pastiche, but it doesn't really live up to the kind of stuff that you were trying to do. When I put it in front of Doc, he was like, hey, I had to switch my brain to not do the decompressed version of everything, like the speed that you're going at in sort of giving information is not something that is often done now. So he had to switch gears and to be like, oh, right, this is that era. And the fact that his reaction was so favorable was a super big compliment for me.
Oh yeah. Like if that guy praises your work, you know you did a damn well job.
Well, I mean, one step back from that is as long as he didn't bomb on my work, like, I don't know about praise, but as long as he didn't say, "Whoa, that is really underwhelming," then I'm kind of like, "Cool, I'll take it." I'll take not getting bombed on.
Yeah, the thing I like about Doc Damo is that he is not afraid to bomb on a work when he thinks it sucks.
Sure, sure, and I don't think any of us should be, right? It's just weird
Yeah.
environment now where if you say, "Hey, I don't particularly like this," and you're a little bit more harsh than that, it's like whatever, who cares? The guy didn't like it. They're talking poorly
Yeah.
about your work and yada. But it's strange because there's a whole contingent of people, and I think this is very human, right? It's like the whole contingent of people who do appreciate your work. Leverage that, work for that, rather than like being so anti the group of people who don't like your work all the time. Like that's got no
Yeah.
value to spend any time in that space.
Yeah, it's stupid, weird human wiring that we just grasp onto the negative despite how small it is instead of looking at the
Yeah.
positives.
Yeah, for sure. But it's like when you see it in full effect with people, when they do make it sort of like a personal mission. So like, how you badmouth my work and you use a lot of cursive language, and it's like, oh yeah, that explains it. Humanity explains any and all of that.
Yeah.
That makes a
And
lot of sense to me, and I can now dismiss it as like that's over there. I'm gonna go focus on something I can do something about.
yeah, and I'm gonna be lying if I said I wasn't biased in this room because I am. We're friends.
Sure,
But I've
sure.
also been reading a lot more manga than mainstream comics, and they do that compressed storytelling. While they also have their slower chapters, they try
Yeah,
their best to keep
yeah. I
up with
mean,
that hyper compressed storytelling because theirs is week in week out, and if you gotta keep people
yep.
walking in every week, you gotta do your best. And I can strongly say that this book does fall into that hyper compressed quality storytelling that keeps you excited and wanting to know more. And it's not
Yeah, yeah,
just people punching each other for 25 pages.
yeah, well, to your point, right? Like, there's going to be instances in the 6 issue arc in which things slow down just a little bit, but not so uncharacteristic. Where you're like, wait a second, it breaks your neck. You know what I mean? Where you're like, whoa, we spent 2 issues doing this, and suddenly we're doing the all talky issues. Like, it's not that. The series is not about
Yeah.
that, right? But it does. There are moments when you're like, I slow it down because I need to be able to talk to you about context. So it's not always going to be, good guys and more good guys punching bad guys in the face, but certainly it's not going to be, oh gosh, this entire issue is just one photostated, or like
Yeah.
copy and paste
It's not
panel
the
of word
cafeteria issue.
bubbles. Right, right. It's not going to be the hey, we're outside chopping wood issue. They did that on X-Men. That was kind of interesting, but again, that was super compressed as well.
Yeah, and when you look at classical storytelling, the ups and downs are needed because if it's always up, then nothing's up. Like if it's just people punching each other, like even if you change who they're punching, it's just people punching each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, action for action's sake, and especially because it's unmotivated, and you're just like, oh, I'm trying to do I laughingly said in one of these issues, I'm going to have nothing but splash pages, right?
Yeah.
Because
I
that's
think that
that's
was
going to
for
be
issue
freaking
4.
fun. Yeah, and then Joe was like, "Eric, please don't do that. Like don't do
God damn
that,
it,
man.
Joe.
It sounds cool. That sounds fun, and that sounds cool. But really, you want to land. There's a motivation for why this issue exists, and this is why. And if it means that we'll do a third of it or a half of it in splash page, you're still getting your point across. I'm like, he's absolutely right. Everything in service to the narrative. So I'm only partially remorseful at the idea that we couldn't do an all splash page issue, but
Same.
it makes a lot of sense. You're still
God
gonna
damn
get
it.
a ton. You're still gonna get issue 4, and it's still going to be the issue that makes Giuliano hate me. But Yeah, it's they're
Is it
gonna get your answer.
Giuliano or is it his flatter?
I mean, I don't want to say one or the other. I think both of them can end up hating me, but I can show you pages from that issue where it's like, yeah, I'd hate to be. I mean, I drew it and it was a lot of fun, and I suspect that when Giuliano's rendering it and he's done, he's going to have a lot of fun. But it's in the doing that's going to
I
make him
know,
go
right?
like, "Jeez Christ, how am I going to get through this?"
Yeah, the poor schmuck who's gonna have to look at like 20 a series of like 20 splash pages. They're like chock full
It's
of
gonna be worth
action.
it. That's the best part about everybody down the pipeline is that yeah, it's gonna be there's certain areas where it's arduous and it's really super tough to think about like rendering it and obviously finding the right sort of bubble placement to not get in the way of the big showy nature of it. But I think everybody is aligned in the idea of like it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it if we pull this off correctly. It's going to be so much fun, you know.
I'm game for it. I'm game.
Yeah.
I can't wait. And speaking of not waiting, it's gonna come soon. We don't have to wait too long because you're like what 10-ish hours, 12 hours away from closing out campaign 2,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah, we're
go into
close. I mean,
print.
we're under a day. Yep. Yep. We're already in print, right? We're already sort of printing. Literally, I'm about to hit the review and sign button for them to, take it out of the sample stage and just start hitting the press, start sending it to press. So, yeah, we're we're done. We're done.
Yeah,
It's literally
that
just like the
is
printer kicks on.
like your whole process is unprecedented to this day. Like having everything sent to the printer before even the campaign is done. I know Common America
Yeah.
has their books done before they start the campaign, but I don't know how deep they are in the pre-press and printing process before the campaign is done. So that's why,
Well,
while they deserve their own credit for being quite ahead in the game, I'm not privy to their processes like I am with yours. So that's why I'm giving you more credit here.
yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I appreciate it, but don't because Tim, the Common America team, are the gold standard for me, right? Keep trying to keep up with Tim Lim is to say that it's impossible, damn near impossible. It's pretty what do you call it?
It's
That's
gonna be hard.
under yeah, that's understating exactly what it needs to because if you think about it, people are like, oh, don't you guys maintain a relatively similar schedule? And the answer is yes, if you kind of squint your eyes and blur things out, we're kind of similar. But if you think about what Tim does, book in and book out, he colors, he draws, I think co-plots, right? And colors it himself, letters it himself, makes it press ready himself, deals with the printers himself, deals with the managing of the books getting to iconic and so on, right? Like short of packing boxes himself, which I know in a few instances he has, right? Short of that, doing that consistently, we are not the same.
Oh
Tim does
yeah,
so much more than
Tim.
I do, you know?
He is as near to a one-man production machine as you can get.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's not to diminish everything that he and Mark collaborate on story as far as as far as story is concerned. I don't want to take anything from Mark because Mark is, I believe, just as critical in the entire success of Common America. But yeah, if you were to say like you're not privy to Tim's process and how they turn around books for Common America, so this is pretty unprecedented. I'm like that's kind, but I think what Tim is doing is pretty dang unprecedented.
Oh yeah, and he's not doing it full time. He also has his
Yeah,
doctor job.
yeah, for sure. For sure. And I don't even like thinking about that. The idea that he has something else, although I'm in the same space myself. But the fact that he's, again, drawing, coloring,
Yeah.
writing, lettering it himself and then getting it pre-pressed ready. I'm exhausted just saying those three things
I
over
know,
and over
right?
at the same time. Yeah.
I'm funny here just with the drawing part, let alone like coloring, editing, lettering, pre-press, dealing with the press themselves, especially when they have like some sort of like weird fuck up, like oh this doesn't match your template. What do you mean it doesn't match your template? It's literally the
Yeah.
template you sent me.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So all of those things can oftentimes does happen, and like I said, there's a reason why he's the gold standard for me. So I'm just playing catch up. What he does is he goes and establishes the playbook, right? I steal parts of that playbook and say like, okay, I can, I'll do it on this end, and then when I mess up, he's the first phone call that I make. I'm like, what am I not doing right? And he's like, oh, this, and I'm like, okay, cool. So more than a friend, obviously more than a guide throughout this entire process. He's been an invaluable resource based on his experience. So it's been great. He's awesome.
Yeah.
I can't sing his praises enough.
Kudos to him and Iconic Comics and that awesome box I also got.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
can't.
people like
I
those boxes, and I don't know. I
they do.
appreciate it, but if I received it in like a basic ass Gemini mailer, I wouldn't be like, oh, I thought I was gonna get a cute box or something. I wouldn't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
minded, but it seems like some people care about this shit.
And I think it means a lot that people care, right? It's
Oh yeah,
because they've gotten Gemini mailers for so long that it's become the expectancy. It's become sort of like the quote unquote standard. But there's something to be said about people who are so voracious about being your fans, being so supportive of everything that you do. And I know it's to your point, you're like, oh, just, if I didn't get that, it'd be okay as long as I got the book on the inside. But it really says a lot when people are so down for whatever it is that you're doing that it's the little things that make them go like, I am so proud to have been part of this process.
oh yeah,
That box is a clear indicator of that. They're like, I didn't get a box. I've had multiple people say to me, because the nature of my campaigns is that the artist edition comes at 11 by 17, and therefore they need to
yeah.
ship it
It's
in
a
a much
big boy.
bigger box so that yeah, it's pretty big, but those boxes weren't, to accommodate that shipping. The boxes didn't go through sort of the art pass, like it just went
Yeah,
out as a box. And I've heard on more than a handful of occasions, hey man, mine didn't have that fancy box. I'm like, oh, that is a big deal, because they're looking forward to just being a fan of anything that is Iconic Comics related. So I'm happy to say we're working on that behind the scenes now. I'll have
yeah.
an opportunity to show it to people just as soon as it gets the thumbs up.
So it's a big box. It's going to house the artist edition as well as whatever the hell people
Correct.
purchase.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I have
Right then.
I have the art directly in my iPad now, and I've been meaning
Ooh,
to get to it, but sometimes I get really I got the itchy tricky finger. I get the itchy shooting finger
itchy trigger
for like
finger.
getting back to these. Yeah, exactly. To get back to my pages.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
need to
you've
get
been
back to that.
so you are so dead set to having everything drawn before even starting your first campaign. That I can
Yeah.
understand that, especially now since instead of 5 issues, we're getting a whole 6 issues.
Yeah, it's a fun. That kind of sets off my OCD because I'm a huge fan of like prime numbers. But the fact that it's
Oh,
six is six. I need to get over it.
it is what it is. Think about it
It
this
is
way:
what it
we're
is.
getting more Arcathene.
That's how people reacted. I was really surprised in such a way that I thought the people were going to be disappointed, because I had said, hey, before I launch, I'm going to have all 5 issues drawn, right? And the closer we circled around the script for issue 5, I'd realized there's just no way I can bring this home in 48/50 pages, which is the standard page count for each book. And I thought, well, I guess I'm just going to have to go down the route of doing more pages in this one book. But then the I guess just the planning, coordination, and the cost of that, right? The
Oh
logistics of
yeah.
that would have been impossible to sell at a price that would be satisfactory to anybody, right? To produce and sell at a price that was satisfactory. So I had to come clean near the launch of the first book and say, hey guys, I'm sorry, but it's actually not going to be 5 pages, and I'm not, or 5 issues, 5 books. I'm not going to have the art done in that before launch, because it's actually going to go to a sixth book. And I thought like, oh, I'm going to take a ding by way of consumer trust, backer trust. And they're like, are you freaking kidding me? We get
I
to
know,
have
right?
an extra book of your
I
art.
get more.
You're worried. Yeah, they're like, you're done with 5 issues. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna have to extend the time because I need 6 issues. And then like, dude, the fact that you're done with 5 is insane,
I
right?
know,
So
right?
yes, launch the book and work on the sixth behind the scenes. So I've taken that to heart, and I've not taken it very lightly that people are enthusiastic about me getting this done. They've extended me a courtesy of trust by going into a sixth issue. That's why I'm so sort of like laser focused and trying to get this thing done sooner rather than later, not getting distracted with anything else.
Well, I'm excited all for it, and on a side note, we gotta keep Giuliano occupied because that guy's so good that I'm in like sort of like this fear state of the mainstream noticing him now that he's working on your stuff that they're gonna snatch him up.
Well, for me, it's like if they do, then good because he's earned it, right? Like I never want to hold
Yeah,
him back
that is true.
from better stuff. If he could just if there's growth not just in craft but also growth in career, and if he happens to be like gets to a point where he's like so super busy, he's no longer able to work on whatever books that I end up making, good. I hope that for him, Um, it is to say I just don't want to burn him out, right? Like he's so good,
That
he's
is
so
also true.
prolific, he just wants to do everything, he just wants to be involved in a lot of exciting stuff. And the last thing I want to have is just be like, Eric, I can't do it because I'm just not inspired to do anything right now. I'm completely burned out. I don't have any more. I don't have energy to work on X, Y, and Z with you. And that's even worse, right? Because
Yeah,
that
that is
doesn't just
worst
impact
ending.
my project, it impacts like him and his
It
livelihood.
impacts
So
his life.
I'd hate for him to get into that space. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just like, hey, dude, do it at a pace. What to his credit, I told him this is going to be a marathon, if not an ultra marathon, and he's been down to do all of it himself. I've offered to get him help. He's like, nope, I'm fully invested in making sure this thing is exactly the way you and I set it out to be, and that means I want to do everything. And I'm like, respect.
That is great.
Yeah.
That is great. But
All right,
I
man.
also, yeah, I'm not gonna keep you anymore because it's already been over an hour.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, go back ATHENA. The links are in the pinned comments. It's ending in 12, more or less 12 hours now. Make sure to
Yeah.
pick up your
Yeah. It's
copy.
exciting.
There is a limited edition B cover, which is hypersexual herself that we've talked about quite a few times. Let me actually show it instead of being an idiot. Where's the cover? There you go.
Thank you so much, dude. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on, and I'm excited for not only receiving book 2, but also book 3, and so on and so forth, and for whatever you do after book 6.
Don't. I'm exhausted just talking about it. It took all of it took all of 2 seconds for you to say it. I'm exhausted just thinking about it. All right, man.
All right, man. Thank you for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and most importantly, backing. I'll see you guys next time.
See you later.